As the 20th anniversary of 9/11 passes, we can begin to see how the long war on terror has affected the West's cultural self-understanding. In strategic terms, the four-ever wars launched after 9/11 spectacularly failed to achieve an outcome better than the status quo ante. Little attention, however, has been given to what 2 decades of media representation of jihadism, asymmetric violence, and military intervention have had upon Western popular culture. The genres of film, the novel, art, and popular music have all addressed the long war on terror from a variety of perspectives, but the prevailing tone might be summarized as, at best, agnostic, at worst, masochistic and self-loathing. In the evolving cultural response to the war on terror, few movies or novels have taken a positive view of the US government and its coalition partners' decision to invade Iraq in 2003. Catherine Bigelow's The Hurt Locker, 2008, and Zero Dark 30, 2012, as well as Clint Eastwood's American Sniper, 2014, are perhaps the exceptions. They offer the most conventionally supportive treatment of the US military and intelligence agencies fighting the good fight overseas. So, too, did several country and Western singers, whose songs might, and occasionally did, serve as a musical accompaniment to the fight over there. By contrast, the majority of US and European filmmakers and pop icons have adopted a morally ambivalent and increasingly critical posture to the war and the Western democracy's political response to terrorism post 9/11. On the domestic front, films and TV series only dealt tangentially with the homegrown jihadist phenomenon, preferring instead to focus on the evolving surveillance state that manipulated the politics of fear to impose and extend already authoritarian state control. Drama series like Bodyguard 2018 and The Informer 2018 present government ministers and the shadowy apparatus of the security state manipulating putative Islamist terrorists to promote a covert and fascist political agenda. The writers of these dramas nonetheless struggled to differentiate their approach to the surveillance state from series like Homeland or The Bureau, which experienced less difficulty in representing Islamically motivated terrorists. The progressive mainstream press, somewhat predictably, criticized all these series, irrespective of nuance, for their cliched description of modern Islamic terrorism. Depicting terrorists from diasporic Asian backgrounds committed, it seemed, the hate crime of Islamophobia. Media condemnation notwithstanding, the Western genre of film and television occasionally offered an intelligent, dramatic response to the moral and political dilemmas raised by the long war on terror. From United 93, 2006, to Homeland 2011-20, The Bureau 2015-20, and Eye in the Sky 2015. These films and TV series thoughtfully explored the difficult moral terrain that the long war exposed for the liberal conscience. The novel, by contrast, has offered only a relativist uncertainty about 9/11 and its aftermath, as is evident in Ian McEwan's Saturday, 2005, or Claire Messaud's The Emperor's Children, 2005. Meanwhile, those novelists who engaged directly with the jihadi character offered only crude stereotypes like Sheikh Rashid in John Updike's Terrorist, 2006, or Bassam al-Jizani, longing for Shahid in André Dubustre's The Garden of Last Days, 2008. Meanwhile, novelists who found in the war on terror a state conspiracy to spread domestic fear, like Richard Flanagan in The Unknown Terrorist, 2006, Mohsin Hamid in The Reluctant Fundamentalist, 2007, and John le Carré in A Most Wanted Man, 2008, either considered the jihadist character an invention of the security state or a somewhat complex but sympathetic character like le Carré's Dr. Abdullah and Hamid's Changes. If the literary response was equivocal, the popular music response was ephemeral, transitory, and again predictable. Patriotic country and Western singers supported the war until it seemed futile, whilst protest music post 9/11 embraced a self-consciously radical pacifist posture. Whilst country and Western artist Toby Keith sang "You'll be sorry you mess with the US of A, 'cause we'll put a boot in your ass, it's the American way," the left coast band Green Day condemned the war on terror because "I don't want to be an American idiot, don't want a nation under the new media, and can you hear the sound of hysteria?" Meanwhile, the visual arts, together with academia and the mainstream media, have offered even less insight into jihadist motivation or the rationale for Western intervention in states of concern. The liberal arts establishment sought to adopt a balanced approach to asymmetric violence. The fact that video artists like Theo van Gogh and Ayaan Hirsi Ali, or the Gillen's Poston and Charlie Hebdo cartoonists might suffer assassination or death threats for satirizing Islamist fanaticism failed to trouble this Olympian pursuit of neutrality. What, however, became evident in the wake of the Charlie Hebdo killings in 2015 was that the official progressive post-9/11 mindset had difficulty in portraying Islam as anything other than a peaceful religion. This unwillingness to question, interrogate, or criticize reinforced an evolving media, academic, and artistic climate of self-censorship. Cross-dressing British artist Grayson Perry was one of the few to admit a baser motive for this posture. In November 2007, Perry acknowledged, "The reason I have not gone all out on attacking Islamism in my art is because I feel the real fear that someone will slit my throat." A little fear clearly went a long way. Empathy, Islamophobia, and the prehistory of hate speech. In the wake of the Charlie Hebdo attacks, the corporate media, along with European and US political elites, came to endorse, in the name of a fashionable commitment to diversity, a minority practice of religious intolerance. Tolerating intolerance as a response to blasphemy legitimated a growing and widespread condemnation of statements or artistic representations that might cause offense on British, European, and North American campuses. Hate speech, trigger warnings, and no platforming campaigns were the ineluctable consequence. Curating the Imperial War Museum's 2018 Art in the Age of Terror exhibition, Sana Moore told the New York Times that the show reflected how the West has changed, and not for the better, through mass surveillance and detentions without trial. The age-defining artwork on display explored not only personal reactions to 9/11s, but also the way Western civil liberties had been compromised and security and surveillance amplified. A visitor to the exhibition would have quickly discerned that the civil liberties at stake were those of Muslim minorities after 9/11s, not those of cartoonists or filmmakers assassinated for having an Islamophobic reaction that deviated from the prevailing progressive norm. Wandering through the rooms devoted to art since 9/11, a spectator would struggle to find any reference to Theo van Gogh, Gillen's Poston, or Charlie Hebdo's cartoons, or the complex issues they might have raised. Instead, the show addressed four themes: the artists' critical responses to 9/11s, the intensified levels of state control after 2001, advancements in weaponry, particularly drone warfare, and the destruction caused by conflict that has turned homelands into wastelands. Nowhere, however, were the actions or the images of those who perpetrated either the 9/11s or London 7/7 attacks represented. The artwork curated by the Imperial War Museum instead gave simplistic visual support to a radically pacifist, critical terror orthodoxy. This fashionable perspective, which found traction on university campuses after 2005, held that Western interventions created instability abroad and jihadism and a surveillance state at home. Its critical tolerance of Islamic intolerance silenced the secular right to blasphemy and cancelled viewpoints on campus or in exhibitions deemed Islamophobic, or, as the woke argot extended its remit after 2016, racist and colonialist. The visual arts, museum collections and exhibitions like the university departments of the arts, humanities and social sciences that promoted this attack on the Western way of war are, ironically, the most heavily state-subsidized institutions of Western cultural life. However, they have adopted and promulgated a reflexive sympathy with the non-Western other in the shape of the jihadist, which contributed over time to a self-lacerating assault on the history and institutional legacy of Western democracy. Critical theory and its impact on Western self-understanding after 2001 thus offers an important insight into the agnosticism that recurs throughout the novels, music, film, visual arts and academic responses to the war on terror. The radically deconstructive political agenda which informed French postmodernism and the neo-Marxist Frankfurt School at the end of the Cold War, and which constituted the key ingredient of critical theory, extended a relativism not only towards language but also towards social action. This extreme relativism advocated for an ethics of responsibility to the terrorist other, which has since revealed itself to be pure cultural nihilism. It is only possible to have this empathetic identification with another culture in an open society that questions the values it promotes. The critical theorist's explicit loathing of the very openness that affords him her, and they the opportunity for histrionic grandstanding, conveniently ignores this constituting fact. Wokeness, terror, and the rise of the revisionist powers. Homegrown Islamists cleverly exploited liberal empathy and used the sanctimonious liberal pursuit of social justice and condemnation of Islamophobia for its own illiberal, politically religious ends. Meanwhile, the progressive media embraced liberal empathy, exploring it in all its woke equivocation in the aftermath of increasingly violent attacks on Western cities between 2011 and 2018. By the second decade of the long war on terror, revisionist regimes of an illiberal or totalitarian hue, observing the confusion that the Western cultural and political response to the war evinced, also sought to exploit it for their own geopolitical ends. During the presidency of Donald Trump in the United States and following the UK's exit from the European Union, the long wars on terrorism fell into desuetude, but their legacy lingered, mutating and growing into a virulent, critical academic and mainstream media campaign on the West's darkly imperial and colonial past and institutionally racist present. The incoherence that now besets the progressive establishment manifested itself in the first direct encounter between new US President Joe Biden's foreign policy team and China's top diplomats in March 2021. The Chinese delegation rejected any American attempt to question its human rights record, pointing out, as senior diplomat Yang Jiechi said, that "I don't think the overwhelming majority of countries in the world would recognize that the universal values advocated by the United States or that the opinion of the United States any longer represents international public opinion. From Beijing's perspective, the US no longer exerts either soft power or global influence." Citing the Black Lives Matter movement, Yang observed, "The challenges facing the United States in human rights are deep-seated. It's important," he advised, "that we manage our respective affairs well, instead of deflecting the blame on somebody else in this world." A new Democrat administration promoting democracy, a liberal international order and human rights abroad, whilst selectively denouncing its own racism and social injustice at home, appears both confused and hypocritical. Why, during the war on terror, did America, and by extension the West's global influence, become so tarnished? What went wrong? A culture of quasi-agnosticism. In the postscript to his 2010 autobiography, Tony Blair, the key architect of a progressive Western-led third way of government and an enthusiastic advocate of the Iraq War, wrote, "For almost 20 years after 1989, the West set the agenda to which others reacted. The destination to which history appeared to march seemed chosen by us." He further reflected, "We thought the ultimate triumph of our way of life was inevitable. Now it is in shadow." Obviously, the mixed legacy of globalization and the financial crisis it unleashed after 2008 has undermined the economic foundations of the progressive project. However, it was the moral and political shortcomings of the long war on terror that played a seminal role in the widespread loss of ideological and idealist faith in a universal liberal institutional order as the culminating moment of world history. In particular, the war on terror and the ambiguous political response both at home and abroad have given force to an otherwise academically obscure critical theory that from the outset viewed the West and its open societies and civil liberties, but not the jihadists, as the main problem for world emancipation. This critical theory view that deconstructed the West's commitment to liberalism and democracy became particularly influential on its cultural response to the war on terror, especially after the Iraq invasion. The dark enlightenment of the European and North American left after 2003 fed into popular cultural tropes. Islamophobia had long preoccupied critical theory. It subsequently came to inform films like Syriana, 2005, Redacted, 2007, and Green Zone, 2010, as well as novels like The Reluctant Fundamentalist and The Unknown Terrorist. The incoherent Western response to international terrorism, where governments prosecuted a war against Islamism abroad but tolerated its advocates at home, has facilitated a morally ambiguous cultural response to the phenomenon. In film, crime drama, novels, and the visual arts, the misunderstood or naively misled terrorist was contrasted with the heavy-handed agents, capitalist interests, and agencies that oversaw the Western response. This political and moral ambivalence informs intelligence-led dramas and novels about the war, from Homeland and A Most Wanted Man to The Bureau, as well as the artworks on display at the Imperial War Museum. In the visual arts, the Age of Terror led to self-censorship, no platforming, and the repression of imagery deemed sacrilegious or satirical. The response to the Charlie Hebdo assassinations and the subsequent silencing of any attempt to discuss or display satirical images of the Prophet and his message demonstrated how the West has now come to accept and comply with the intolerant strictures of Islamist ideology. By the second decade of the 21st century, some version of relativism or quasi-agnosticism has become the default Western cultural position on international terror. Even for more intelligent attempts to grapple with problems of both imbello and adbello conflict in films like Eye in the Sky, or Michel Houellebecq's novel Submission, 2015, either accept or explore the limitations and failings of Western liberalism. The popular cultural response to the war on terror peaked midway through the second decade of the 21st century. Thereafter, terror and its threat have functioned as a cultural signifier, intimating official stereotyping, and as a plot device to expose the mistreated non-Western other. The West's institutions, its police, militaries, judiciary, business interests, and political parties are either corrupt, insensitive, morally compromised, or institutionally and individually racist. Continental philosophers from Jacques Derrida, Gilles Deleuze, and Michel Foucault to Theodor Adorno and Jürgen Habermas had from the 1970s exposed the supposedly false consciousness that distorted the West's miserably capitalist self-understanding. The British and American epigone that packaged these writers' reckless ideas for consumption across the Anglosphere came, in the course of the long war on terror, to dominate popular and mainstream media, as well as university humanities departments where the ideology flourished, mimicking and displacing conventional scholarship. Ironically, the Western media, long held by Herbert Marcuse, the godfather of critical theory, to be the vehicle of a totalizing one-dimensional modernity, have translated this histrionic cultural relativism and nihilist deconstruction of secular liberal values into accessible commodities for popular consumption. By 2020, the prevailing popular media depiction of the West, with its inherent propensity to violence and overt and covert racism, placed it on a lower ethical plane than the terrorist whose resistance on behalf of the victimized deserved critical recognition. The 2 decades-long encounter with critical theory and the Long War deracinated Western cultural self-perceptions, making it impossible for the West to defend its values, let alone promote them, just as Young Jiechi recognized. The closing of the Western mind. What does the cultural response tell us about the overall state of the Western mind? Above all, we see the bankruptcy and intellectual exhaustion of progressive thought at the end of history. The dark enlightenment of the left after 2003, like the liberal globalizers of the 1990s, they succeeded, assumed that world history was moving towards a socially just, diverse but inclusive utopia, whereas the Blairite third-way leftism had assumed that the West would set this global agenda. The critical theory-inspired woke left saw the West as the problem, with the solution being alter globalization, with its transnational networks of NGOs, critical theory academics, radical pacifists, indigenous peoples, sexual minorities, environmental activists, as well as the odd jihadist, promoting universal liberation through the overthrow of the Western capitalist imperium. Such dogmatism is, of course, without any foundation. It is the reckless effort of the critical mind and of the culture it informs to escape being stifled by solitude or nihilism, or by a value imposed by those whom the dogma profits, such as those who monetize notions like white fragility or who buy large houses from the financial proceeds of Black Lives Matter donations. As Albert Camus presciently wrote, the end of history is not an exemplary or perfectionist value. It is an arbitrary and terroristic principle. The problem is that the West, at the end of the Cold War and in the first decade of the Long War on Terror, had seemed certain of its liberal international purpose, a purpose in which all people could be united. The core lesson of the Long War was the failure of this purpose to achieve progress toward a society embracing equally all human beings. This has engendered a moral and political crisis. The cultural response to the war on terror, the equivocation, relativism, moral ambivalence and self-censorship, defines this crisis of Western progressive faith. It also intimates, if nothing else, the need to return to a more prudent approach that accepts the fact that political society remains what it is and always has been, namely a society whose primary task is its self-preservation and whose highest calling is its self-improvement. A distracted and confused democratic West needs to thus reclaim its cultural moorings before it again foists its universal values upon the world. Thank you for watching. This video is a chapter in the book, A Front Row Seat at the End of History, by authors David Martin Jones and M.L.R. Smith, and published by the Bruges Group. To view more videos in this series and more content from the Bruges Group, please subscribe to our channel. See you next time.